Hello, and welcome to another edition of Professor Speaks. My name is Alex Hernandez. This is Dr. Craig Stern. Today we're going to be talking about fentanyl. Fentanyl is a very potent prescription synthetic opioid that is typically used in a restricted medical setting and advanced cancer patients. Fentanyl comes in many different formulations. There's an injectable form, there's a patch, and there's even a lollipop form to release the drug gradually. We are seeing this drug being used more on the streets as drug dealers are using it to cut up heroin, and heroin users are taking it unknowingly, not knowing that fentanyl is in the heroin, and it increases the possibility of an overdose. So, one thing Dr. Stern can tell us is what is the difference between a synthetic opioid and a regular opioid?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. When you first brought this issue to me, I was worried that we were going to do kind of a lecture on pharmacology, which would put everybody to sleep. So let's try and keep it relatively simple to deal with. In the body, naturally, there are natural morphine receptors. And by that I mean the following. In the body, whether it's in the brain or other parts of the body, that gastrointestinal tract or nervous system or otherwise, there are receptors. It's like a lock and key system. The receptors are the lock and the drugs are the key, and they come in and they turn it and they open it up so that there is a response from these receptors.
Okay.
And it's mostly a chemical response that elaborates a certain chemical that moves from one nerve to the other or one position to another and creates a problem. So we've got the lock and key issue to what goes on. And naturally, in the body, there is these endogenous or internal to the body morphine type of receptors. So if we have pain, the body naturally, all by itself, without any drugs, immediately elaborates some of these to try and control the pain response to our body. It may not work, it may be not as strong, but it naturally does that. Morphine is part of a natural drug that was created by looking at the natural endogenous morphine and by looking at that of other animals, etc., and identified that it was a natural product that effectively looked like or was the same as what was going on within the body endogenously. On the other hand, people have looked at morphine and heroin and others, diacetylmorphine and others, have looked at that and said, well, maybe we could make a molecule like that. And so in the test tube, they built these new opiate type of drugs. Fentanyl is one of them.
Right.
And so what they've done is to take what was created as a natural drug or looking like a natural drug, and they have created something that is a test tube type thing to go in competition with what is natural. In doing so, they're able to make things by manipulating side chains and everything in the chemical that make it even more potent. So things like fentanyl are 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine.
Right.
And some of the changes that have also gone on to fentanyl, there's probably more than a dozen of different types of fentanyl that have been changed by changing this side chain and that. They've created ones that are 1,000 times more potent than morphine.
Probably carfentanil.
Carfentanil is one of them.
Yeah. Well, what makes the drug? You probably answered this, but what makes it actually lethal? Is it just the potency, or?
No, there's really a couple of things. One is that fentanyl was originally created as a drug to be used in surgery. It was used in human surgery. It's also been used in dog surgery, in animal surgery. And it was used because morphine is a drug that lowers the pain threshold by calming the entire body, calming the system.
Right.
Fentanyl, on the other hand, attacked the pain itself. There are particular receptors, that lock and key system, that the lock that deals purely with pain. They're called mu receptors, and the fentanyl attacks the pain mechanism. So it's less of a calmative, like morphine, that is still pain killing, but it's calming,
Right.
to a pain management like fentanyl that deals with that. And they were used in surgery. They were used in combination with other drugs, anesthetics, etc., to deal with additional pain management in addition to anesthesia to deal with what went on in pain. It was also recognized that people that have enormous pain, like cancer patients, also had a need to be able to control this pain, so they needed fentanyl to deal with it. Now, it's also important, and I beg your indulgence for a moment with regard to the pharmacology, but when you deal with drugs, the stronger that a drug links to a receptor, like the mu receptor, the stronger that it does, the more potent is the drug. If it links, but it's not a real strong link, then it's not as potent of a drug in getting a response.
Okay.
Fentanyl has links to the mu receptor very strong. When it finds it, it links to it, kind of turns it on, and elaborates things that decreases the serotonin, decreases the acetylcholine. It's effectively decreasing upper and downer in order to try and deal with the pain management.
Okay.
Well, in doing so, it works very well in surgery, in cancer, in areas where people have enormous pain and can't function. They just can't deal with any kind of activity of daily living because they're in so much pain. So this can deal with it.
Okay.
The problem that makes it lethal is that now people are using it in an ambulatory setting, in people who walk around. And in that ambulatory setting, you're dealing with a drug that is very potent, but also has the second problem that morphine in general does not, and that is it has been formulated because it isn't a natural substance. They were able to change the molecule.
Right.
So it can be given with a injection, it can be given orally, it can be given with a sucker that you suck on, and it gets to the inside the buccal cavity of the mouth, so that it goes directly to the heart and the blood system, bypassing the liver to get that. And then, very importantly, they also have an aerosolized portion. The aerosolized portion, people don't even know it's there. So if you're taking the drug, of course you know it's there. And of course you know that you can take it, and then there's a question of how much you take, etc. But if you're a policeman or someone who is out there and is evaluating or coming into a den where they know that there is drugs, etc., they don't necessarily know it's there. So they inhale it, not realizing that it's a problem.
Right.
And that inhalation is, unfortunately, depending on the amount that they do and how pure it is, causes them to overdose and therefore need to be treated for the overdose so that they don't die from it. That's the real issue and the problem that we're addressing.
So it becomes lethal once you ingest it or inhale it and then overdose, and then without any, how fast do you say should you be treated? Like,
well, this is a very fast-acting drug.
right.
The fentanyl, the benefit of fentanyl as a clinical medicine is that it's very fast-acting. So it works in surgery, it works in people who have significant pain, and it deals with the pain right away, but it doesn't last forever.
Right.
There are some modifications of the fentanyl that have been created, and those last longer. And so depending on what kind of fentanyl, depending if it's in the street, how much it's been cut with other things.
Right.
Because it may be used to cut heroin, it may be used to cut morphine, or it may be the fentanyl by itself, but it's also been cut with other agents. Depending on what the strength is, you need to deal with it right away, because those people who get it, because it's short acting, have an immediate kind of problem that occurs now.
Right.
And therefore you need drugs like naloxone or otherwise in order to address the problem. So we've got a drug that's well used and has a significant impact on what goes on clinically, surgically, and cancer, et cetera, and then one that is being used out in the community that may not be pure fentanyl, it may be one of the congeners or one of the modifications, and that can be inhaled, and now we're dealing with something that acts very fast, effectively gives an overdose very fast, needs to be treated very fast, and gets into the bloodstream very fast.
Well, moving right along, with the government limiting the availability and prescription practices of opioid addicts, the addicts, they turn to heroin because it's becoming harder to get these opiates prescriptions. So they go to heroin, and then this in turn leads to skyrocketing of heroin overdose or any other opiate overdose. So how do prescription opioids differ from the street ones?
Yeah. When studies are done and surveys are done,
Mm-hmm.
the vast majority of opiates, narcotics,
Right.
are prescribed by primary care physicians and dentists. And the studies that have also been done have identified that they have been given quantities of medicine that are far beyond what would be used in order to treat the pain of those conditions. So for example, and only as an example, in many surgeries, they're given opiates, usually hydrocodone and APAP or oxycodone, something like that. And they give it for quantities of 30 days or more. Typically, if it's given for more than 3 days, it's unnecessary because most of the pain is rationalized over a very short period,
Right.
even over surgery. And then you move from a case where it requires opiates or narcotics to something that can be handled with NSAIDs or acetaminophen or just rest and tolerance or other kinds of things, physical therapy, etc. The problem that we have is that the drugs that are used in medicine are prescription medicines that are pure fentanyl for whatever the use is, whether it's an injectable form, whether it's a oral form, whether it's the Actique, the lollipop form,
yeah.
whether it's the inhalant form. These are prescription, and they go through the United States Pharmacopoeia Convention to ensure that they're pure for prescription purposes.
Right.
On the street, however, fentanyl may be used because it's used or brought over from whatever was used in prescription, or more often than not, it's one of the modifications of fentanyl that have made it even more potent than the fentanyl that is used by prescription. Right. On the street, there are no controls. There's no control that says that it is meeting the requirements of the United States Pharmacopoeia or any other pharmacopoeia that says what the requirement is, what the potency is, etc. So these can be anything.
Right.
And depending on how they're cut, and they're frequently cut so that people can make more money out of them,
yeah.
Then depending on what that strength is, you're dealing with a drug that's fentanyl, but it's a congener or a modification of fentanyl. And instead of being 50 to 100 times more potent than morphine, it's potentially 1,000 times more potent than morphine or more. And then depending on how they cut it, you may be getting part, a lot, a little, whatever of what goes on. So this is a difference in drug. If they get pure fentanyl, it's bad enough already because they don't know how to use it, they don't know how to dose it, they don't know how to address it.
Right.
And certainly, as I've indicated, the inhalant is a problem because the people who are inspecting, they don't know it's there and they're inhaling it.
Right.
And then there's the street drug that is fentanyl, but it's a modification of fentanyl, and now you're dealing with something that's 1,000 times or more potent than morphine.
Okay. And then, in your opinion, I mean, I know there's only so much we can do, but in your opinion, what could be done to help curb this epidemic? Meaning, what could the FDA do? What could the CDC do? Or what could society do to help curb this epidemic?
Well, the traditional approach has been education.
Right.
Tell people about it, try and inform them about it, in a way, scare them about it so that they understand how important it is and that this is not something you play with because you potentially could kill yourself or kill someone else.
Right.
So communication has always been important, and it will always be one of the standards of what you do. The narcotic opiate problem continues. It's been attacked from many different realms for the last 30 years or so, and there hasn't been a good solution because people who want it get it.
Right.
The shift and the concern here is that we're moving because of the clampdown on narcotics, so that the narcotics that are commonly used, hydrocodone, APAP, oxycodone, things like that, they have been more restricted because people are worried about the opiates. So people are now looking at other options, and those other options frequently are more potent and have a even greater problem in what goes on. Therefore, the real issue that people need to understand is, one, communication and education. Two, they need to understand that this is not a long-term thing. The amounts that are given, whether given medically, need to be cut down significantly, and these ideas of 30-day supplies or otherwise need to go away, and they need to deal with it with 3-day supplies, 5-day supplies, and stop and give alternatives. There needs to be a significant communication going on with other alternatives to pain management, whether it's behavioral, chiropractic, physical therapy, or otherwise. They work, but they need to be addressed, and people need to understand them as alternatives to pain management, not that the drug is the drug and therefore it's simple. And then the other part of it is people need to understand that they are truly risking their lives now. These drugs are not a simple drug that you take just to feel high or to get some sort of a blunted concept of what goes on with what goes on. The other part of it is further education about it, because people who use these drugs also have impairment of their decision-making capability.
Right.
So they begin to make bad judgments about people that they associate with, people that they're working with, and it's drug-related. It's not an issue of just being a junkie or some other kind of nonsense about what's happening, but rather they need to understand that this is affecting how they function, and not just how you function with pain, but how you function with your other decision-making capabilities, making errors in that. Finally, is the issue that the drug manufacturers have begun to look at adding drugs like naloxone or otherwise into the compound itself, so that there is something to try and diminish the strength from what people get. It won't stop people from getting whatever they want, because, as I said, the congeners of fentanyl and others can be made in the test tube. Well, if you can deal with it and make the fentanyl, or you can modify and make some side chains, but in the test tube, then obviously people who really want it are going to get it. But the others who don't appreciate it, those rules are severe, and we are going to have to go through significant restrictions on what they do. Part of this is due to healthcare professionals. They work, they give it to people so that they won't be unhappy with whatever the surgery is, but the idea of giving huge amounts for a long period of time, those kind of issues need to stop, and they need to restrict those kind of quantities.
Are there guidelines in place now to restrict those?
The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, has come up with guidelines for quantities and how to use opiates. The World Health Organization, the WHO, also has requirements. The American Pain Society has guidance, and so they're dealing with it with regard to healthcare professionals, doctors, pharmacists, nurses, etc., to deal with this. But it's also a program trying to let everybody know about it. And as you restrict one thing, then something else becomes the alternative. And that's our real problem. How do we begin to deal with a drug-related society where everywhere you see advertisements for drugs that will solve all of your allergy problems, all of your diabetes problems, your high blood pressure problems, and your pain problems, and it becomes very easy. And we need to work on that kind of societal issue, which is not immediate, not something we can do right away, but we need to think about how that influences people and what happens.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Stern. That's all we have for you today. Just be sure to visit propharmaconsultants.com. We have a free information page. It's called RxInfoX. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments, please leave them below. And I guess the big major takeaway is communication is the key in all this. Doctor-patient communication, and even our mass media, meaning social media and various news organizations, need to get the word out about what's going on with opiates and
that's a very good
fentanyl
point.
And all that.
That's great.
Thank you again, and thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next week.